Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at this press conference with the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission on the Islamic Republic of Iran, whose members are here to share with you the findings of their latest report. As you may know, the Human Rights Council established the fact-finding mission in November of 2022 to investigate alleged human rights violations related to the protests that began in September of 2022, especially with respect to women and children. The mission released its report today, and which will be presented to the Council next week. We're pleased to have with us all three members of the fact-finding mission today. In the center, we have the chair, Sara Hossain. To my right, Shaheen Sardar Ali, and on my far right, Viviana Krsticevic. So with that, we'll begin, and the chair will deliver opening remarks, followed by our fellow experts, and then we'll open the floor to questions. Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry about that. Good afternoon. My name's Sara Hossain, and I'm the chair of the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission on the Islamic Republic of Iran. As you heard, I'm joined by my fellow members, Professor Shaheen Sardar Ali and Viviana Krsticevic. I will outline what we've done over the last year to consolidate our investigation into the protests that broke out on the 16th of September 2022 in Iran. My colleagues will then speak to the current situation and what has changed, and then on accountability and next steps. This morning, we released our second report to the Human Rights Council, which we will present next week to the Council in an interactive dialogue. We will also release our detailed findings in the form of a conference room paper. Over the course of the last year, our team has collected new material and strengthened the evidence for our previous findings. In total, we've now collected over 38,000 evidence items and interviewed 285 victims and witnesses. We've also extensively reviewed information from the government of Iran, including that which is in the public domain, and we've now examined incidents across 17 provinces in the country. We've preserved all of this evidence in line with our mandate, and we'll make that available to credible legal proceedings whenever and wherever they occur. Our report set out a roadmap on truth, accountability, justice, and reparations. They include our consolidated findings from 2 years of investigations. These reaffirm that in repressing the 2022 nationwide protests, state authorities in Iran committed gross human rights violations, some of which the mission found to have amounted to crimes against humanity. This includes evidence in relation to the unlawful use of force, torture and ill treatment, arbitrary arrest and detention, sexual and gender-based violence, including rape, and serious fair trial violations. This year, we received information from the government of Iran-appointed Special Committee on the 2022 unrests. Some of this related to accountability measures, which they stated have been taken domestically. They have referred to 621 judicial cases filed against law enforcement officials, of which they mentioned that 563 cases have culminated in judicial rulings. However, the committee has not provided us with a detailed breakdown of the number of criminal convictions or acquittals, or of administrative measures, or of the amounts of compensation paid to victims. They also have not explained to us the crimes to which these complaints related. In light of our mandate, we have significantly strengthened our evidence on the treatment of children, ethnic and religious minorities, and LGBTQ+ persons in the context of the protests. With respect to children, we gathered evidence of unnecessary and unlawful use of force against children, both girls and boys, and we heard many harrowing accounts of harsh physical and psychological torture and a wide range of serious fair trial and due process violations committed against children, including some as young as 7 years old. We concluded that the security forces, as well as some members of the judiciary, made little or no distinction between the treatment of children and adults. We also deepened our investigations into the situation of ethnic and religious minorities, finding that they had been specially targeted in the context of the protests, and that some of the most egregious violations were carried out in peak protest towns in minority-populated regions. We also found that LGBTQ+ persons amongst the protests were targeted, again for their real or perceived sexual orientation and/or identity. There were 2 new areas of investigation this year. One concerned the disturbing pattern of deaths of some protesters, including girl children, which the state dismissed as cases of suicide. These cases were particularly difficult to investigate, but we found that they all followed similar patterns, with judicial harassment of families, including actions to prevent them from mourning their loved ones, and denial of many of the allegations and an absence of detailed investigations. Another new area for us related to the frequent use of mock executions. We found that detainees, men, women, and children, had been held in some cases at gunpoint or had nooses put around their necks in a form of psychological torture. We further strengthened our evidence regarding patterns of transnational repression, including threats and intimidation and attempted assassination of human rights defenders, including journalists, victims, and their families abroad. We concluded that Iran's repression of the protests was far-reaching and transcended its own borders. I'll turn now to my colleague, Professor Sardar Ali.
Thank you, Sara. Thank you. I'm going to speak about our investigations into continuing violations against victims and survivors and their families in the aftermath of the protests. I will also speak about major shifts in policies and practices impacting women and girls as well as protesters during this last year. We found an alarming pattern of systematic repression and silencing of victims and their families, including through summons, detentions, and prosecutions, and preventing them from commemorating the deaths of their loved ones, with violence escalating during the anniversary of the protests, both in 2023 and 2024. Persecutory conduct extends to those who have acted in solidarity, such as human rights defenders, lawyers, teachers, trade unionists, and journalists, compelling many to leave Iran. 10 men have been executed so far, and another 11 men and 3 women are at imminent risk of execution. There has been an alarming increase in the use of the death penalty, a 3-fold increase from 2021, which is the year before the protests. Executions were carried out amidst credible reports of gross fair trial violations, including torture-tainted confessions. A new and worrying trend is the death sentences against women, including for their activism. This includes the cases of Bakhshan Azizi and Sharifeh Mohammadi, who are at imminent risk of execution, as well as Varishe Muradi, whose request for review is pending before Iran's Supreme Court. Digital space was another critical arena for protesters. Equally, surveillance online was a critical tool for state repression. Instagram accounts, for instance, were shut down and SIM cards confiscated, in particular of human rights defenders, including women human rights defenders. Together, these actions demonstrate the concerted, persistent state effort to stifle dissent, perpetuating a climate of fear and systematic impunity that denies victims the rights to truth, justice, accountability, and reparations. Regarding structural discrimination against women and girls, despite the pre-election promises by the president to ease strict enforcement, the state has ramped up the enforcement of mandatory hijab laws and policies. While a new law is pending consideration, its provisions have already started to be applied with increased deployment of police and of so-called ambassadors of kindness deployed by the IRGC to enforce the mandatory hijab in public places. At least 2 women and 1 man have been subjected to flogging for violating these laws or advocating for their repeal in the last year. We have also seen the chilling enhancing of surveillance through apps, drones, and the use of facial recognition technology, with thousands of women having their cars impounded and many more being made to pay exorbitant fees. Thank you, and I'll hand over to my colleague Viviana Krsticevic.
Good afternoon. Building upon the mission's first report and accompanying conference room paper, we have taken the time this second mandate to provide further guidance on reparations and accountability avenues to ensure that victims, survivors, and the people of Iran have sufficient guarantees of their rights, and that measures of non-repetition, including structural measures, are adopted to prevent further violations. We took steps to consult with many victims about their expectations. We also talked to experts to enrich the legal principles and the diverse experiences that would support our recommendations. Moreover, following our mandate and standard practice from other investigative bodies, we collected and systematized information on the evidence on the human rights and criminal law responsibility of entities and individuals. In our reports, we have reaffirmed that structural discrimination in law and practice against women is the root cause and the trigger for the gross human rights violations and crimes against humanity that occurred in the context of the state response to the protest linked to the Women Life Freedom Movement. Consequently, we outlined some of the structural measures needed to ensure that violations do not repeat themselves. As a result, we highlighted the need to do profound legal reforms to ensure the inclusive and equal participation of women in public life, to guarantee all rights for all women, and amongst the measures, the legal measures that we thought were crucial were the rejection of the mandatory hijab law, and the lifting of restrictions so that women can fully participate in public office, including in the judiciary, in an equal footing with men. We have reiterated to the government of Iran the need to release all persons arbitrarily detained for exercising their freedom of expression and freedom of assembly, and to stop the application of the death penalty against protesters and human rights defenders. The FFM also recommended measures to the international community, including the support of victims through medical and trauma treatment, memorialization and truth-telling initiatives, the establishment of funds for victims, including with the proceeds of frozen assets of individuals, amongst others. On accountability, we did not take this task lightly. The FFM went to great lengths to establish whether domestic remedies were in place and accessible to victims, and concluded that chronic impunity persists. Victims have, for the large part, not obtained justice, truth, or received reparations, as already mentioned by the chair. Additionally, we have documented many instances in which victims and their families are harassed domestically and abroad when searching for accountability or justice. Moreover, we gathered and systematized evidence pointing to human rights and criminal responsibility of individuals and entities involved in gross human rights violations and crimes against humanity linked to the patterns and incidents documented in our report. Finally, in light of the gravity of our findings, we have recommended that the Human Rights Council continue to retain attention on the situation of human rights in Iran, including by creating a follow-up body to carry on the work of the fact-finding mission on Iran. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll open the floor to questions. If we have any from the room, AFP, please go ahead. If you could just please identify yourself and the media outlet that you work for.
Sure, Robin Millard from AFP. One thing that jumped out from your report was about the use of technology and how technology is being used not to liberate people's lives, but to bring about surveillance and repression, as your report says. Could you talk a little bit more about that aspect and how you see that aspect developing over time?
Yeah, we've seen this as absolutely critical because obviously digital space has been was crucial for protesters to express their opinions at the time of the protests in 2022 and onwards. And as a consequence, we've also seen that that's been the space in which that surveillance and restriction of speech has been quite massively engaged in by the government. So some of the things that we've seen are, for example, compelling Iranians to use national apps, for example, rather than being able to use anything that's on the international platform. And part of that is a way of also continuing surveillance on individuals. We've also seen extensive trolling and surveillance of individual activists during the time of the protests and subsequently. We've used, as my colleague mentioned, we've seen how facial recognition technology is now being used to track women who are not complying with the mandatory hijab rules. And we've seen massive, thousands of women being affected by that, being fined, some women having their cars impounded. So the consequences of restrictions in online space spill over quite significantly into offline or real lives as well.
I just add as an example the Nazar app, which is a particular app that the government has instituted, where after vetting, sort of normal citizens can also file a complaint against someone who's just passed by and hasn't got the mandatory hijab. So this technology that's being used for surveillance is really very far-reaching and highly intrusive. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's take a couple questions online. We have first Gabriela Sotomayor. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for the briefing. Two questions, may I? First is, how are you going to make sure that women in Iran have access to this report? Is there any strategy that you are thinking about? And secondly, you just mentioned that, well, I ask the second question after. Thank you.
So one of the advantages and the beautiful things of issuing a mandated report at the Human Rights Council is that it gets translated into many languages, including Farsi, and that breaks one of the barriers of access to the information. We are also using different tools such as infographics and videos that we will be releasing next week in order to create bites of information that would help the general public be informed about the content of the report and some of the roadmap for reparations and accountability in the country. Moreover, many in Iran resort to the digital space for their activism inside and outside the country. And that creates a vibrant community that circulates information and also creates their own pieces of information and releases and videos and infographics in order to elaborate and dissect and interpret what it is. In many ways, a very technical document.
May I just add that for the benefit of the ethnic minorities, the infographics, the Instagram news is going to be translated into Kurdish and Baluchi languages as well. And so because some of our Baluchi and Kurdish people on the ground may not be, they may be non-literate, and so therefore the infographics and the videos and snippets that are more sound-based will probably help with access. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We go to the back. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Mahdi. I'm Legal House News Agency. I have a question. In your report, you primarily focused on the action of the Iranian government. However, in meeting with other stakeholders in geopolitical discussion, you acknowledge that certain group also contributed to the escalation of violence in Iran, and that peaceful demonstration were hijacked by group sponsored by foreign states. How do you reconcile the border content with the narrative in the report? Do you believe your report fully reflects the complexity of the situation?
Well, we were mandated, as you know, to look into the situation regarding the protests that broke out in September 22, and there was very specific reference in the mandate to looking in particular at the situation of women and girls, and that's what we tried to focus on. So we've and the extension of our mandate also, we continue to look at the same kind of scope. So from what I understood of your question, you were asking us whether we were looking into the security situation in Iran. Is that correct? Is that what you were asking? Sorry, I couldn't completely follow it. Could we just ask the question to repeat that bit?
Could you repeat the principal part of your question, please?
No, I say, are you in a report about status other country and other group in about problem last year?
We didn't look into the situation of other countries. We were looking into the situation in Iran and the impact of the protests on people in Iran or from Iran. We did look into the situation of Iranis who had been compelled to leave the country and go abroad because of the repression that they faced. We also looked in the context of the analysis of what happened in some of the minority populated areas. We did look at reports and we made some findings that there were some groups, armed groups that were present at some of the protest sites, but we also found that the protests were largely peaceful. And so there was not really justification for the disproportionate use of force against protesters in those areas. That was specifically in relation to the incident of the Bloody Friday incident in Zahedan in September 22.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to another question online from Jamie Keaton from the Associated Press.
Thank you so much for your presentation and your report. Very interesting. I wanted to just see. Robin kind of took my question about the use of technology as a surveillance tool, and thank you very much for the comments about the Naser app. I just wanted to see if you could sort of more generally just describe the kind of evolution that we have seen in sort of your own words, off the cuff, if you will, about the evolution that you've seen since the protests began in September 2022, in terms of the situation for women and girls and the discrimination that they faced, and particularly with the use of what you call a state-sponsored vigilantism. How is that generally? Maybe this question is for Ms. Hossain. Just how has that generally evolved over the last 2.5 years or so? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I mean, I think the overall evolution we've seen is we saw sort of these the extreme use of force, extreme and unnecessary and disproportionate use of force to crush the protests back from September 22 onwards, pretty much up until December, a little bit after that. We also saw massive arrests and detentions, use of torture, use of sexual and gender-based violence. We mapped all of that in those first few months after the protests broke out. And then around about December, January, we saw those executions taking place as well of 10 protesters, and that had an enormous chilling effect, I think, on the protests across the country. And what we've seen in the period since then, since about January 23 onwards, is a slightly different pattern playing out, where the protests have not been on that large scale that took place at that time. There have been sporadic and further protests ongoing, but we've seen the response of the state being to repress, essentially try to, first of all, on the one hand, deny many of the allegations of violations, and the longer allegations, we've made findings of serious violations, of gross human rights violations, and as you know, last year we also made findings of crimes against humanity. But what we found is that the denial, the construction of an alternative narrative, and repression and silencing not only of protesters, but also the victims, the witnesses, their family members, and people who acted in solidarity with them or tried to support them, so lawyers, journalists, teachers, trade unionists, and others. And what you mentioned about the vigilantism or the engagement of vigilantes by the state, we've particularly seen that in relation to the continuing enforcement of the mandatory hijab rules with, on the one hand, the Revolutionary Guards have this group called Ambassadors of Kindness. On the other hand, with this Nazar app, as you just heard about from my colleague, vetted individuals are able to enter information about women who are violating the so-called mandatory hijab rules into this app, and that information goes directly to the police, who then will take action against those women with warnings, with fines, ultimately with impounding of cars and so on. So those are some of the ways that we've seen things happen. We've also seen incidents over the past 2 years where, again, individual members of the public took action against women for violating mandatory hijab rules and so on. So I think we've seen this trajectory play out from extreme violence and so on in the months when the protest was at its peak, to now a kind of a silencing and repression that's ongoing.
Thank you. All right, let's take another question online from Laurent Sierro from the Swiss news agency.
Yeah, thanks, Todd, and thanks for the press conference. In the report, you point out the role of the current president and the fact that he didn't fulfill the pre-electoral commitments he had done. So how would you qualify that? Is it complicity of crimes against humanity? Because in a sense, it's perpetuating the systematic violations against women. And then the second question would be, why don't you ask for a renewal of your fact-finding mission and rather a new follow-up mechanism? And what would be the format that you would recommend for that follow-up mechanism? Thank you.
Okay. As you have seen, we have noted that the current president has made statements that are very important and in intending to make legal and policy changes. Those have not come to fruition, and consequently, based on the information, the overall information that we have gathered on the conduct of all state entities in Iran, we have established that there are still human rights violations that are continuous in the country. There is a persecutory conduct that has been established in the previous report and that has continued. On the establishment of a new mission, we have proposed a new fact-finding mission because we believe, based on the investigations of the protests that we have made, that we had carried on with our mandate and with the tasks that the Human Rights Council has given to us. But in investigating the patterns and circumstances, and in looking at the responses of the state to some of the human rights violations, we understood that a broader lens would be more fruitful to address different types of human rights violations that we have encountered that have fallen outside of our mandate. We have made specific recommendations on how do we believe that mandate should follow, and what is the content of the mandate. And we suggested that it looks at the root causes of violations, that it includes a focus on women and girls. We have also asked for the Council to consider looking at freedom of expression and assembly, at harassment of human rights defenders, at aspects of equal access to justice and public life, dealing not only with women and girls, but also with different types of minorities, including ethnic and religious minorities. And we have suggested as well that the body would still be an investigative body that would be able to document profoundly these trends and their root causes, and address the need to collect evidence on individual perpetrators and entities with the view of cooperating with legal proceedings. So that has been the overall recommendation that we had. We had a very narrow temporal mandate as well. So it was a thematic mandate that was narrow and a temporal mandate that was narrow. And we believe that it would be better to have not have those constraints.
Thank you. We have a couple follow-ups online. Gabriela, go ahead.
Thank you very much. My question is, if you had the opportunity to discuss this report with the government of Iran, and also if you have any evidence of Russian soldiers during the manifestation, the use of force during the protests. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we shared the report with the government of Iran, as is standard practice, prior to issuing it. And no, we don't have any evidence about, we've not found any information about the involvement of Russian forces during the protests.
Okay, thank you. Follow-up from Lawrence Sierra.
Yeah, thanks for the responses. But I'd like to come back to my first question about the president, because so you mentioned the commitments that he made before the elections, and then you mentioned that climate of ongoing persecutory conduct. What is missing to me is the connection between the two. So how do you qualify the role of the president in all that affair? And would it be exaggerated to talk about complicity of crimes against humanity? Thank you.
Well, we've looked at specific entities, the police, the morality police, the IRGC, the Ministry of Intelligence, various security councils, the prison system, and also elements of the judiciary. And we have looked into the role of those particular entities, and we have made some findings regarding their involvement in the suppression and repression of the protests. So you'll find that in our report. And we are awaiting some more information, in fact, also about the government of Iran in this connection. So we may make some further findings.
Can I also just add, in relation to the question that you've asked about the president, is that the hijab law has been paused, so it hasn't been promulgated, and we were expecting that to come into operation, but since the election of the new president, it has been paused. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more follow-up from AP online. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to just see if I could get you to take a step back. I know you've been digging very deeply into all the details of this, but as a general sort of perspective, I mean, some of this surveillance technology, the Nazar app and what have you, I mean, how unusual is this? How unprecedented is this type of tool? Is there any place in the world that uses this type of technology to repress women's rights? Could you just put it into a broader context for us to try to understand, for people in the street to understand how kind of unusual this kind of surveillance is in the world? Thank you.
Well, we haven't been surveying the world, so it's hard for us to give you that comparative analysis, I'm afraid, off the bat. But I think what we can say is what we've seen with the use of that Nazar app is kind of how egregious it is in terms of imposing sanctions on women for actions that are really to do with their daily life. I mean, they're being sanctioned for simply not complying with the mandatory hijab rules, including having sort of their daily life functions interfered with. So when, imposing a fine, a criminal penalty, beyond that first warning, and then ultimately leading to impounding of cars, that means a woman can't, for example, take her kids to school, go to work, maybe if she has to drive to work, go to hospital if she needs to take, other people to hospital, take herself there. I mean, it's an interference with sort of her basic mobility and functions. So it seems kind of extraordinary. As you're right to say, yes, facial recognition is increasingly being used across the world in authoritarian and other contexts, including, for example, to monitor protesters and take action against protesters in all sorts of countries, including we see in the global north. And that's a disturbing global development. But I think what's unusual and extraordinary about this is the kind of activity that is being monitored through the use of this app, which is completely, protected conduct, what a woman wears or doesn't wear, and that she shouldn't have to be sanctioned for that and shouldn't have to face direct restriction of her access to various services and so on. Sure, of course.
Yes. I wanted to add that having seen in many countries the use of surveillance for persecuting human rights defenders, I found the experience of documenting and investigating Iran pretty puzzling for several reasons. One is the development of this national internet network that allows a level of control and restriction of speech and activism in the digital space at a level that is really unheard of in most of the world. The second aspect that I found truly puzzling is the use of these different tools, these digital tools and apps that would basically enlarge the set of actors that can actually engage in the repression of protected conduct. So the Nazar app allows that level of vigilantism that we marked and we underscored in our report. And that is pretty unique. And it's very important because I think as we've seen in Iran and in other countries, digital spaces and digital tools are crucial for activism. But in closed societies, in repressive societies, they're more so. And having these same spaces and tools deployed to stifle dissent has a compounded impact on a country such as Iran.
Can I just add to concretize the examples that were given earlier? That due to the Nazar app, there's denial of basic services to women based on the hijab wearing or not wearing. So their bank accounts can be shut down. They'll be denied services into hospitals and so on. And these have actually happened post-September. So it's a very clear reprisal for women who do not wear the proper mandatory hijab. Finally, a very concrete example that 8,000 vehicles that were confiscated because their drivers were not wearing the proper hijab were actually released in the summer of 2024. Thank you.
We'll take a question from the room. Robin from AFP.
Thank you. Just following up on the previous question, on this Nazir app, who are these people who are vetted to use this app, and how many of them are there? I'm just wondering how deep this goes into society. And then secondly, in terms of improvement of the situation that you outline in your report, do you see any signs of hope that the situation for women and girls in Iran could change and improve along the lines that you outline?
I don't think we have information regarding the nature of the so-called vetted individuals or their numbers. And with respect to hope, I think the main, in the work we've been doing, when we started, we were not we didn't know whether we'd be able to reach anyone. Since we were not able to go into Iran in all of these 2 years, we never were able to get the permission to do that from the Iranian government. We didn't know whether we could reach people. But what we've seen over these 2 years, we've spoken to almost 300 victims and witnesses now, inside Iran and outside. And I think ultimately there's an extraordinary source of hope, because despite all of this repression, people inside Iran keep on looking forward. And we've spoken to witnesses who, we've said, can you carry on? How do you carry on? And so on. They said, we have to carry on. This is our country. We're fighting for our rights, and we're going to establish them. So I think that is the ultimate source of hope.
Okay, thank you. All right, did you have a question in the back?
To be more specific, I clear in my last question. I am concerned about the support of foreign groups for the protesters in Iran. Has your report also addressed the support from foreign government and opposition group such as separatists, the Mujahideen Khalq, Munafiqin, and etc. For the protesters? And do you, in general, believe in the existence of such interventions and provocations?
I think that it would be absurd to say that Iran is not facing all kinds of threats around itself. There are clearly serious security concerns at the borders and elsewhere. But what we were mandated to do, and what we have done, is look into the situation of alleged human rights violations in the context of the protests that broke out. And what we have found, and whatever the context, whatever the security context in Iran may be, we have found that there is no justification for the violations that occurred against the Iranian people in Iran following 16th of September 2022.
And thank you. If I may just add that, as you all know by now, that we were not allowed access into Iran, that the government of Iran, out of the 35 communications that we sent them, we only received responses to 5, and those 2 were incomplete and not to our satisfaction and detailed enough. So in response to your question, one thing that would have really helped for us to answer your question would have been if we had access to the country and if the government of Iran had come forward with evidence that there was foreign intervention in the protests. That would have helped us a lot, because whatever we have received from the government of Iran in the form of any steps that have been taken have been reflected faithfully in our reports. Thank you.
Okay, let's take a question online, a follow-up again from Gabriela. Did you still have a question?
Yes, thank you. I think I didn't ask in the right way. But you just mentioned that you were in communication with the government of Iran about the report. But did you have a wider response of the government of Iran to your report? What do they think? What did they say about it? And also, the second question is, do you think that the report could be an evidence, for example, in the ICC court, to follow this case, I mean, in an international court or something like that? Thank you.
Thanks so much for clarifying that question. Yes, we did get more detailed responses in a number of forms. First of all, the Special Committee on the 2022 unrest, which was set up by the government of Iran, that met with us last year. It met with us also this year, quite recently, and it has produced a report regarding their findings into the consequences of the protests. I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks today that they have provided some information regarding the number of cases that have been opened in Iran against members of the law enforcement agencies. They've also made some statements about compensation given out to victims. And some disciplinary action taken. Our concerns are that we've received this information, we've reflected it in the reports, but we have not received any of the breakdown. So we don't know exactly who, how many, where have been proceeded against, what is the final outcome of these proceedings, also who, where, again, how many have received compensation, nor have we informed what kinds of crimes these actions have been taken in relation to. So there's a lot of missing information still from there. We've also seen other government reports produced by a body called the High Council for Human Rights, which again has provided some information around action that's been taken by the government of Iran. We're told there are going to be some new bodies also established in connection with providing relief and redress for violations. Again, we do not have the details. We don't have enough information to assess that at this time. We were also told about some directives that had been that the government stated had been issued by different authorities, requiring restraint in the response to the protests. We've asked for these directives many times. We've not yet received them, and not yet had an opportunity to analyze and verify them fully.
Can I just sort of add to that, regarding your particular reference to the ICC, that Iran is not a state party, and so therefore there cannot be this direct intervention. But victims can make submissions for crimes that happened in countries that are state parties, so transnational crime, but we have no knowledge of any such case for the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more questions from the room or online? Okay, looks like not. All right. Thank you very much for joining us today, and have a good day. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.